I vote to use my skills and training.
I vote to use my skills and training
To protect these animals.
to protect these animals,
To protect this land.
to protect this land.
In this mission,
In this mission,
I'm prepared to give my life.
I'm prepared to give my life.
This is my duty.
This is my duty.
I am AKASHINGA.
I am AKASHINGA.
This is where people who were enslaved were held until it was time for them to be shipped out onto vessels waiting here. This is the door of no return. And once they passed this point, it was the end of life as they knew it. It was the end of their culture, their names would be changed, they would have a life of forced labor, their children and their children's children would be born into slavery. And so this was really the end of their freedom.
In these last years, to be a hunter has become very hard. The old hunting grounds, like where they used to hunt, we cannot reach them anymore. They are just history now.
The trail took us here, to South Africa, where we teamed up with a local journalist. An eyewitness had seen the money being smuggled in at Johannesburg Airport. His account led to the ultimate treasure hunt between two teams of former spies, special forces, and government insiders from Libya and South Africa.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Barry Walsh, editor and content director at Real Screen Magazine, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us for this special documentary and factual roundtable presented as part of the Banff World Media Festival. Now, it's my pleasure to welcome our panelists for today's chat, all of whom are behind some incredible projects that we're going to be learning more about over the course of this next hour, and all of which are nominees for Outstanding Documentary and Factual at this year's Rockies. So congratulations to each and every one of you. Now we're spanning the globe for today's discussion. Joining us from Israel is SIMCHA JACOBVICI, journalist and the series director and executive producer of ENSLAVED, The Lost History of the Transatlantic Slave Trade, which premiered on the CBC and EPIX in the US, CBC in Canada. Now we also have, to my, I guess, four rows down, director, producer, cinematographer Scott RESSLER. I'll ask everybody to wave as I introduce him. Here to discuss The Last Ice, a doc feature from National Geographic Documentary Films. We also have Kim Butts, design director of the Avatar Alliance Foundation and producer of the doc short AKASHINGA, The Brave Ones, which also aired on Nat Geo. And we have MISHA Vessel, co-director of The Search for Gaddafi's Billions, which was made for the BBC's renowned Storyville doc strand. Okay, well, introductions are out of the way. I'd like to start our chat with a little bit of the story behind each project's origins. Maybe beginning with you, SIMCHA. Tell me how this project came together, a very ambitious project, and how you brought Samuel L. Jackson, who hosts the series, into the fold.
Well, I was actually doing for National Geographic, this is about 4 years ago, I think it was, a documentary called Atlantis Rising, and that was executive produced by Jim Cameron. And through that, we went looking, Atlantis, myth or fact. And there was a lot of diving, and we went looking at different places, and we got to meet a lot of marine archaeologists. And in the course of shooting, you sit around and you talk, and one thing led to another. And we ended up attending a conference after we delivered Atlantis Rising in the UK, and being part of this marine archaeology world. And we learned some astounding things. So for one, I consider myself a pretty educated human being, but I did not realize that 12 million Africans had been trafficked to the New World, during the almost 400 years of the transatlantic slave trade. I didn't realize that. Nor did I realize that at least 2 million died en route, never even made it to be slaves in the New World. They died. That was shocking to me as a child of Holocaust survivors, that these 2 million had gone unacknowledged, unremembered. So and the other thing is that marine archaeologists pretty much knew where some of these slave ships were, but they didn't have the interest. Other people weren't interested in funding them to dive them and so on. So that led to a search, and we found DWP, Diving with a Purpose, which is kind of the action arm of the National Association of Black Scuba Divers in the United States. And they've been diving. They're amazing people. They do this as volunteers. They've been diving slave ships, but again, there's issues of money and so on. So the pieces started falling into place. You know, we had amazing characters, a big story, and we still, you know, today times have changed. You know, that might have been enough a few years ago, but we didn't want to do a special. We wanted to do a series. We said, you know, this topic deserves it. What with the economics, the politics, the culture of the people. So. You know, this friend of mine who was an executive producer and is now Rob Lee, he's now an agent at UTA. He's been an agent. He got, it's a long story, but he got to Samuel L. Jackson. And I'd known that Samuel L. Jackson had done his DNA and realized that he was related to the Benga tribe of Gabon. But I hadn't known that he was also a diver, and that before he became an actor, he was interested in studying marine biology. And he is a social activist. He was one of the pallbearers or usher at Martin Luther King's funeral. So not only a Hollywood icon. So when we met and he said, I'm in, all the pieces had kind of fell together. And the next 3 years, you know, we did Enslaved.
Okay. Well, you mentioned Jim Cameron off the top of what you were saying there. And so perhaps it's a good time to throw to Kim and perhaps tell us more about the Avatar Alliance Foundation and how you came upon your story of this group of women who comprise the special force fighting poachers in Africa, and how you turned it into a doc project.
Well, Avatar Alliance Foundation was founded by James Cameron. And our primary focus as a foundation is to, you know, our focus is climate change, you know, oceans conservation, any kind of conservation, indigenous rights. And when we see a need, we try to, you know, assist in ways and such as when we came across AKASHINGA. It's like, we met Damien at Sundance on a film that Jim had executive produced called The Game Changers, which is on the men and meat myth. And, you know, not to get off on a diatribe with that, but the one thing we could do for climate change is get meat off our plates. It's pretty simple, you know, and this film was just a fun way of showing that. So anyway, Damien Mander, who is the founder of the Anti-Poaching Foundation, also started AKASHINGA. And he was part of this film as somebody that said, how can I continue to protect these animals and put them on my plate? So, and it's part of just like living what you're preaching. So we took Damien to meet Jim at the Avatar set one day, and Jim just heard Damien's story and he goes, this is a film, you know? And so Maria and I just packed our bags and set off to Zimbabwe. That's how we started with this. You know, it was what we call a story on a platter, you know, just begging to be told. It focuses on climate, or it focuses on conservation, but it also focuses on triumph. And what we're doing is, like, if we can focus on the triumph and communicate the fact that there's an issue, but, you know, get people standing up and clapping, you know, that's a way to really get a message across.
Definitely, definitely. Now, going over to the other corner of the world, perhaps, but another Nat Geo project. Scott, maybe tell me about The Last Ice and how you came upon that story and the people who comprise the main characters for it.
Sure. Well, I work for Pristine Seas, which is an ocean conservation initiative within National Geographic. And we've been making short films around the world with the goal of creating policy and getting marine protected areas created. And when we started looking to the Arctic, initially we were looking to make a 40-minute documentary about the wildlife and the melting sea ice in this very specific area between Canada and Greenland. After the first few trips, it became really evident that this was going to be a people story, a human story about Inuit who have been living there for centuries and were just recently colonized, especially on the Canadian side within the last 100 years. And suddenly all these different elements started coming into play of geopolitics, industry, people who are looking to exploit the melting ice and where Inuit sit within all of this. There's issues of identity that came into play. There's issues of sovereignty and land rights. And we eventually found these great characters. One is a young Inuit woman in Nunavut named Matali Okulik, and one's a young Inuit hunter in Greenland, Alakatsiak Perry, who are both sort of wrestling with what their future is going to look like as not just the ice changes, but also the culture changes, and you have all this renewed interest in that region, mostly for exploitive purposes. And then, much like with Kim, we found this great message of hope in that there's this whole effort being led by Inuit on both sides to create protected areas, but not having any power at the federal level. Of course, there's a lot of barriers that they have to face in order to actually get legislation passed. So the film sort of became a way to try and tell this extremely broad story and weave all these threads together, while also going on the very personal side, and then hopefully having some sort of a positive message and impact at the end, which is why this turned from a 2-year project into a 5-year project.
Okay, well, we'll definitely get into that because it sounds like there are some challenges in the midst of all of that. But MISHA, tell us about the process behind bringing Search for Gaddafi's Billions onto the screen. Now, did you pitch it to Storyville or was it commissioned outright?
So the idea originated when my co-director, we did a series on 5 years after the Arab Spring. And we visited all the countries that were involved in the Arab Spring. And we saw the same mechanism in all those countries. The dictator was gone in Tunisia, and Egypt, and Libya. And so was a big portion of their money. And especially in Libya, as you might know, Gaddafi died the richest man on earth. He was worth over $150 billion, which is mind-blowing, I think. My co-director was in Libya in 2016. And he attended a tribal meeting, and some of the tribal leaders told him, Libya is such a rich country. We have a lot of oil money, but a lot of cash money went missing when Gaddafi died. And we were immediately intrigued by it. So we started researching, and we found out that a lot ended up in South Africa because it's kind of an open secret, but Gaddafi and Nelson Mandela were really good friends. Mandela even named his grandson after Gaddafi. And then we followed this crazy treasure hunt for these missing billions in South Africa. And so to answer your question, we pitched it at the Sheffield Doc Festival for about 20 European broadcasters. It was like going back to first grade, giving your first lecture to your classmates, right? So it was kind of nerve-wracking, but everybody was super enthusiastic. And that's, so, and then Storyville stepped in right away as well. So that was great.
Okay, yeah, those pitching forums certainly look like daunting propositions whenever I sat in them.
Yes, they are.
Now, we kind of alluded to challenges in all of this, so let's dive into those, because anybody who has made a documentary knows that you may have an idea of what you want to chronicle at the beginning, and then after the whole process, it becomes kind of a different animal at the end by the time of delivery. Let's talk about some of the challenges that you encountered over the course of the project. Perhaps some of them were pandemic related, perhaps not, depending on the schedule for shooting, post, etc. And of course, we want to hear about how you overcame them. Kim, maybe we can start with you. Did anything pop up that you might not have been prepared for at the outset?
Well, I was thinking the hardest thing about this film was getting the boots to sync up at the beginning, at the top of the film, because it really was. The story was there. Maria Wilhelm, with her extensive reporter background, knew how we just went in. Our shoot was only a very few days. I hired a team, local camera team from Zimbabwe, so we use local people, which is important to us as well. And we went in and just, I think the film shoot was 5 days. And so we knew what the story was. We did our research before we went in. There were some insurance issues because I wanted to go on raids that were happening and they didn't want us going in, as a team. But there, again, this was a story on a platter. And the most important thing is we were so focused going in. We knew what the story was and we had everything boarded up, on a storyboard. So it was kind of just checking those boxes. So unfortunately, I don't have any really hard, traumatic things to report.
Well, that's a good thing.
It is a very good thing, very rare.
Now, Scott, you say it went from a 2-year shoot to a 5-year shoot. So obviously some things came up. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the challenges you faced.
Yeah, I think for us, probably the biggest challenges were narrative ones. And as the film shifted over to one that was more people-centric, really feeling the responsibility and weight of telling this story in its totality in a way that made sense and rang true, especially for Inuit in the Arctic. One thing that was, I guess, a bit of a challenge, but also, we really respected and thought was kind of novel, especially from other places we filmed, is that almost to a person, nobody will speak for anyone else's experience and nobody will speak to the broader Inuit experience. There's sort of a cultural emphasis put on, you can only speak to what happened to you. You can't tell anyone else's story, which is, I'm used to going to places where you have people lining up to sort of speak for everyone, which is probably not always the best thing to happen. So, we took our time. Fortunately, we had an amazing luxury of executive producers and backers who said, take your time and, do this right. And ultimately, I think our challenges, even for filming in the Arctic, were mostly in the edit room and not in the field.
Yeah, and certainly those challenges can be daunting as well, especially if you come back with acres of amazing footage and you have to make those difficult choices about what to keep in and what to keep on the cutting room floor. MISHA, how about you? This is a story that, as you say, involves myriad locations, all sorts of tangled webs. So did you get stuck in any of those webs?
Yes, for us. Well, for us, the filming was a really big challenge because we had to film in Johannesburg, which is not the safest place on earth, and also in the war zone in Libya, which is also not the safest place on earth. And we entered the world. So by following this treasure hunt, we uncovered widespread corruption between the Gaddafi regime and the ANC. So it was an incredibly dangerous topic. And we entered this world of spies and arms dealers and corrupt politicians. So it was incredibly dangerous. To give you an example, one of the people who claimed he saw the Libyan money come into South Africa, he was a spy, South African spy. We met with him in Serbia, and he was assassinated 6 weeks after our meeting. Gaddafi's banker, Bashir Saleh, who fled Libya in 2011, went to Johannesburg, was attacked during our film period. He was in ICU for a month and then had to flee the country and disappeared on us. So, you know, it's a very shady world we entered, and it was very tricky to get these characters to sit down and tell their stories because there was a lot on the line.
Yeah, definitely. Wow. Okay. And SIMCHA, before we started, you had mentioned some of the challenges that occurred with doing the RECRE content for the series. It's a very ambitious series, so I'm sure that there were challenges at every step of the way. Maybe you can elaborate on some of those.
Yeah, I just want to know if MISHA found the 150 billion and is going to be funding all our future documentaries.
Yes, actually right now I'm sitting on an island, a private island now. Unfortunately, no. Actually, so the rumors are that 12.5 billion went to South Africa. I'm not sure if it was 12.5 billion. We're sure that a lot of money went there, if it were millions or billions. But no, I mean, if I had found the money, I probably wouldn't be sitting here anymore. So yeah.
Okay, so we can get more documentaries from you now that you have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we had a lot of challenges, as you can imagine. Basically, there are three storylines that we followed. One is the diving. We dove 6 sunken slave ships, and each one was a character in the episode, and we didn't want it to be the same kind of story. So one episode deals with the economics of the slave trade, another the politics, another the ideology. How do you justify doing what you're doing, you know, treating people like chattel? Another with the cultures left behind, resistance, because a lot of times people portray these Africans as just victims, and they don't realize to what degree there was resistance. The cultures left behind, the cultures that some of our culture in the world today was born in the bowels of those ships. So we tried to cast each ship, and it was very difficult because you want to find a different story, but you want to be able to know, is there something really there, how difficult it is. So that was very difficult. When we were in the English Channel, as one example, we dove the earliest slave ship ever identified underwater, and we were held back day after day by storms. And it was a very, every day that you don't dive and you're looking at the budget and you're freaking out. And then it was a very deep dive, 150 meters. So people have to do it on mixed gases. That's dangerous for, it really takes elite divers. So there was that storyline, the dive. Then there was the Samuel L. Jackson storyline, which in the first episode was more dominant because he goes back and he's kind of reintegrated, so to speak. He's welcomed by the tribe of his ancestors. But in each episode, there was that storyline, that personal journey that he goes through. And then there was a journalistic storyline, which I shared with on camera with Afua Hirsch. And she and I went around and, we had to find stuff, and we found, in Portugal, a mass grave of slaves that after they were discovered, instead of a monument being put there, they turned it into a mini golf course. So that was journalistically a first. Or in Gabon, they found these really mountains of oyster shells, which is, you can get the oysters, which were like testament to the last meal, so to speak, of these Africans before they boarded the ships, because that was readily available. When you see the millions of oyster shells, you realize the millions of people that were trafficked from there. So each one of these had its own challenges: diving, the trying to tell a story that people don't necessarily want to tell, taking someone of the fame of Samuel L. Jackson into Africa and out of Africa safely, because not every one of those places we went to, you got to be sure that nothing's going to happen. Everything's going to, is going to work. I mean, we got taken for a ride by one airline, private airline, that we were stuck on the, we were stuck in the middle of nowhere with no airplane. So the president of Gabon had to intervene on our behalf and get us a plane. So there was each element was a challenge, and creatively weaving those three in the editing room over 6 episodes took a long time to get it just right. But, you know, where there's a will, there's a way, and we were very fortunate that everything worked out.
And in terms of the recreation stuff, you had shot that was shot in the UK, or where was that shot?
Yeah, we used the James Bond set for the underwater stuff, and you know, we piggybacked. We went when other people didn't want to go, like on off hours, to kind of piggyback our documentary budget on what we wanted. And we used various tricks, one of them using Hollywood placeholders in the edit room. And people don't like to do that because they say you're going to put, you know, a Steven Spielberg scene as a temp, and then you're going to shoot it. It's going to look so much shittier than you don't want your final cut to look worse than your rough cut. But we were quite confident, and we used all kinds of tricks so that when we shoot, it's very targeted. So it feels very rich in terms of recreations, but there's no dialogue, but it's action. And you know, Nick Green, who directed the recreations, is such a talent. He's a UK-based director, and it worked out, you know.
Well, I next wanted to get into another very vital component of doc making, and that's access and gaining that access. It's so important from a, you know, a journalistic standpoint, and also, you know, it requires a great amount of diplomacy sometimes in order to gain that trust and that access. Let's talk about how you each gained access to the people and the worlds that you're depicting in your stories. MISHA, I'm sure you had to do a lot of negotiating, as you mentioned. Your diplomatic skills have probably increased tenfold over the course of this project.
Yes, well, I read some reviews and they said, okay, so the directors must be very persuasive. I don't know if that's true, but I guess we're patient, I would say. Yeah, so we worked with a local investigative journalist in South Africa, which really helped because in Europe, for example, if you want to speak to a politician or somebody, you go to his representative and you make an appointment. But in South Africa, it's a little bit different, or at least in our experience. They have to know the person that is introducing you. So it really helped to work with a local journalist who could introduce us to people. And then, yes, it took many hours on the phone and persuading people to tell their stories. And of course, before you start filming, we visited South Africa many times, try to, you know, build trust, gain trust, etc. For example, ANC's covert head of intelligence, who has never appeared on camera before, gave a first interview, and for him it was also incredibly dangerous because he's accusing, you know, Jacob Zuma, the former president of South Africa, of corruption, and he was really fearing for his life. And so, yeah, what we do is we went there on research trips and we talked for many hours and tried to. But in the end, what persuaded him was that he felt that his party, the ANC, went down the drain during the Zuma years. So he really wanted to stand up and tell his story. So I think you always have to find the motive for them to tell their stories. And then also, I think being sincere really helps. So what we always do is we say, look, we ask any question, we're going to be really critical. But we're open about it. We're not going to hide anything from you. I mean, the interviews we do are really tough, but at least you know what we're after, and you know what we're aiming for. And I think that's the only way to do this kind of stories.
Definitely. Okay. Now, Scott, you had mentioned that you were working with Inuit communities in the Arctic and navigating the cultural norms there. And obviously this is a story that impacts those communities so greatly. Tell me about gaining access to those communities and how you gained that trust.
Yeah, I think like MISHA, sincerity was probably the #1 thing, and honesty of intention. There's a long history in the Inuit world of filmmakers and scientists and conservationists coming in and expressing one intention and then having a very different one ultimately. So there was a lot of openness to stories being able to be told, but also very healthy and understandable skepticism. A lot of my initial visits with people that we were engaging with, I would go up and it would be just me, no large film crew. I'd have a camera. I often wouldn't take it out for the first few days and just sort of be there. And ultimately, I mean, it's always going to be sort of a leap of trust for people in what you're going to do with the film. But I think it's also not a very large community. I mean, Greenland alone, the entire country has a population of about 50,000 people, which can cut both ways depending on when people start to really understand what you're after. So once we started getting some key players on board, you know, word travels quickly, and then this person knows that person, and it becomes pretty clear right away to most people that you're going to be doing something that is going to be beneficial, helpful, and hopefully honest.
And Kim, I mean, obviously you were working with great characters here, and you had mentioned that Damien kind of brought you to the fold, but I guess tell me about how you gained the trust of the force and how you captured their relationship and their intensity, because it is a very intense thing that they're doing.
So I think that the most important aspect of this is that we weren't going in to tell their story. We were going in with cameras to let them tell their story. And these women had come from brutal backgrounds, abusive marriages. Some had to resort to prostitution to support their families. They were raising children on their own. And what they have done to this community is, you know, since they've been on the force, is that these communities have completely turned around. When they get a paycheck, the first thing they do is buy clothes for their children and get them in school. They're building their homes, they're starting other businesses on their own, they're building shops. And so before we even got in there, this had been the turnaround. We met with local chiefs who just embraced us and the women. They had already gone through the phase of, yeah, right, like these women can do this job. And then they've seen what's happened in not only in the wildlife, where when Damien moved in, there was no wildlife left. It had all been decimated. And while we were up there, we just popped a drone in the air and here's this herd of elephants. You know, word's out that women are protecting, you know, the land, and it's safe for those animals to come back. And so, you know, that is, and they're just such warm and friendly people that, you know, we were embraced. We embraced them. I was so absolutely humbled and honored to be in their, you know, that they allowed us to come into their homes to shoot them. So again, it's like, I won't feel guilty because this one was so easy because I've been in brutal shoots. But this is, you know, it's just a remarkable story. And this is a short. And, you know, the bigger picture is, the bigger film is down the road after, you know, 5 years where, you know, Damien has a remarkable story to tell. And as the women have evolved, this is still a new program. It's, you know, about 5 years now, but in another 5 years, what's going to happen? And that's where the larger film will evolve.
Okay, well, it's still an important story worth telling, definitely.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Now, all of these docs came to audiences during a year of pretty huge disruption at a global scale. I mean, even outside of the pandemic. And each one of these projects kind of touches on that disruption to some degree. For contending with political instability and dictatorship in myriad countries, the impact of climate change, the importance of conservation efforts, and also a truly global reckoning concerning the scourge of racism. Even a couple of short years ago, commissioners and broadcasters might have shied away from some of these topics for fear that they might be seen more as polemic as opposed to entertainment. But that pendulum has swung. How do you approach the balance of telling the story you want to tell, yet doing so in a captivating way? And do you see an increased hunger from buyers and audiences for tackling the harder hitting stories? Maybe SIMCHA, we can start with you on
that. Well, okay, there's a few pieces to that answer. In terms of how to tell the story, I always want to tell a story that my kids would want to watch. And if my kids are tuning out, then I've got a problem. So they want to watch an adventure, and they don't mind learning. They don't want to be lectured to, but if the adventure teaches them something, then all the better. And that's where the diving came in. It became a very important springboard to the journalistic story, the historical story, because it was an adventure. The other thing, it's people, as Kim was saying, people connect to people. And these divers are amazing human beings, and they connected with them. So people have connected with them, and then through them, they learned all that, and they didn't mind learning. They didn't feel lectured to, because these people have a passion. They care about what they're doing. It's about their ancestors. It's about human rights and all that. Secondly, you need a team. If you're going to do a 6-part series, we shot on 4 continents, 12 countries. You need a team. And, I was very fortunate to have, I think the best of the best, Rick Bienstock, Emmy winner, Felix Golubev, Emmy winner. I mean, really, Yaron Niski, I mean, really amazing people. And the Jacksons, they were involved. Wasn't just Sam in front of the camera. It was LaTanya Jackson really involved, and Eli Selden, who brought that whole thing together. So I was very fortunate. It was a co-production with Sarah Saper in the UK. Something of that magnitude, if you don't have a team, and all the pieces start falling down. So we really were a team, and we believed in we had a vision together. It wasn't like we were fighting each other. And that was very important, because when we started out, people didn't want the series. Several broadcasters said, oh, you've got Samuel Jackson, we'll give you a special. And we didn't want to do that. So when we started out, it was different in terms of something like the slave trade. But then George Floyd happened literally while we were editing, and the world changed. The world changed. Something that people didn't want, they wanted tomorrow. And we really felt it. So, all those things, the storytelling and the logistics and the team had to come together. And I think the trick was to just stick to, when I hear these other filmmakers, they've got a vision, stick to the vision. We stuck to our vision, and it worked out.
Definitely. Now, Scott, with films dealing with climate change, as I was saying, maybe 3 to 5 years ago, it was kind of seen as a subject to treat with kid gloves to a degree. And then Blue Planet 2 happened. And then everybody became a little more warm, no pun intended, to the subject and to telling it accurately and passionately. How did that impact your project? And do you see more of a need and more of a desire from, you work primarily with Nat Geo, but across the whole landscape, do you see more of a hunger for this type of programming?
Yeah, I think there's a confluence of things going on. One is just that the topic's getting harder and harder to ignore as the planet is warming. And I think with climate change, the story of it is sort of evolving a bit. And I think that, like with our film, tracing it back to not just emissions, but also things like colonialism and any sort of system where you're having a sort of invented end to justify the means that is creating policies that don't make any sense or are just wrong. I think that's starting to unravel across a large number of areas in the world. And I also think that the documentary medium is evolving, where this stuff's being made more palatable. I don't know if that's the right word for audiences. I think that people are getting more understanding of how to make it a bit more entertaining, for lack of a better word, where it's not just being lectured at, like SIMCHA mentioned, but it's also being told in a way that might engage an audience and then give hope as well. And that's one thing we try to do with our film. It's not just, hey, the world's ending and there's nothing we can do about it and everything's terrible. You have to give a little glimmer of hope at the end, because we have to be optimistic, and there are solutions out there to these overwhelming problems.
Okay. And Kim, I mean, the AAF works primarily in the conservation and scientific world, and trying to find solutions for these problems. So in terms of how you approach content, it must be good news for you and for the AAF that the pendulum does seem to have swung, and the world is more ready to digest these sort of stories.
Well, part of that is because there are a lot of us that are able to put that and get eyes on. And what we do is really try to say, if we're oceans focused, we did a piece for the first UN Oceans Conference, and we just showed these beautiful images. And it's just like, how do you get people to protect? It's like you can't slam them, but you can. They're going to protect something that they love. And so if you can show the beauty of something, then people kind of wake up and say, wow, what am I doing? How can I get involved? What can I do? Damien has this one-liner in the film, and he said, for so long, we've been blinded by our egos from seeing the most powerful force in nature, and that's the woman's instinct to protect. It's like, boom, the one line. And it's just where that is, we have access to technology now that we can create this immersive experience for people to not just be shooting facts at them, but for them actually to be enveloped in the beauty of some of these things. It's profound what we can do with the technology now. But you have to have the story first.
Yeah.
Until
the robot overlords conquer that, that's our responsibility.
Yes, that's another topic.
Now, MISHA, your project, big investigation, and definitely there are networks and strands like Storyville that are renowned for this sort of work, but budgets are certainly getting tighter, and there has to be a lot of trust from a broadcaster to put that sort of effort and time into an investigative work. Did you find that you had full support going all the way through? And were there ever any times when there was a little bit of a concern about any sort of routes that you were going on?
No, we definitely had the full support, and with an investigation like this, you really need it, because every word, every comma has to be right, because otherwise, you're going against somebody like Jacob Zuma, so you get a dozen lawyers on your back if it's not completely right. But I think it's a good point that you're raising, that in Europe, public broadcasting is facing a lot of cuts, and public broadcasting is vital in doing these big investigations and exposing things. I think it works a little bit different in the US, but in Europe, public broadcasting is pivotal. And the BBC, for example, is really facing cuts, people losing their jobs, and it worries me. It does worry me, and in Holland as well. I'm based in Amsterdam, so yeah, public broadcasting is under fire, and I think it's not a good development. So I really hope that politicians and everybody sees the importance of investigations like this, because I think without it, our society is dead, basically.
Yeah, agreed. Public broadcasting needs the most support that it can get from all corners. Yeah. So now we've discussed the individual projects, and thank you very much for your perspective. I'd like to kind of do the 30,000-foot view on the documentary industry with all your standpoints. And I guess from the start, we need to address the pandemic and the fact that it's definitely impacting every strata of our existence, and certainly will impact the doc genre going forward. I mean, from a financial standpoint, we've seen that docs are increasingly good business for a wide range of buyers and broadcasters, but funding has always been an issue for filmmakers. Whether you have access to great teams or whether you're a 1 or 2 person shop, and an uncertain global economy might make that even more of a pronounced issue. Let's get your thoughts on how you think this past year and the challenges within are going to impact storytelling going forward. Maybe Scott, we can start with you.
Well, I'm hopeful. I think that, for a lot of people, this was a reflective time, and I think there's obviously a hunger for content. And I'm hoping that more and more people who are staying home maybe got engaged with documentary that weren't before. And I know every documentary filmmaker I speak to is just itching to get back out and shooting when they can, if they haven't already. And, I can't really speak to the larger economics of the industry, but I would hope that, as MISHA says, that people are seeing this as really vital, not just in individual countries, but globally. I mean, we have stories to tell, there's injustices to expose, and it's not in a way that standard journalism or other places are doing it. I mean, I think we really serve a niche that doesn't exist elsewhere.
And SIMCHA, your project, Enslaved, was a Canada-UK co-pro, and certainly co-pros seem to be on the increase to help kind of assuage any financial difficulties. Do you see that as a trend that's going to be continuing going forward?
Yeah, I think so, because, we've been talking about documentaries being more entertaining, right? And part of that entertainment is, good music score, really time to shoot properly, to have lighting, to have good cameras with good lenses and so on. And all that costs, time to hang around and do it right and not look like you're just running in and running out. So that's expensive, and it's getting more and more expensive and more difficult to get, one broadcaster to ante up the whole money. So, we've been very fortunate. CBC was totally with us. At the end of the day, Fremantle came in a big way, Epix in the United States. So we were able to put together these pieces of the puzzle. We ended up on BBC Two on Storyville. And so, it was a little bit hair raising because we didn't have all the money, perfectly, until we were able to put all the pieces together. But I think that's the future. Yes, you have some projects that some broadcaster wants world rights and will pay for it because it's huge. But the rest of the time, I think we have to be very creative in creating these alliances.
Definitely. Now, Kim, the stories and the issues that the AAF brings to the fore via its content initiatives aren't going away. Maybe you can tell us what you're up to next, and what the next thing we can look forward to is.
Well, we've got several projects going on. We have a team of people in the oceans on a vessel called Ocean Explorer. And we've got, we just finished Secrets of the Whales with a National Geographic production launched on Disney Plus. There's, one of the things with this COVID, or, what is going on is the Spanish flu ushered in the Industrial Revolution. There was no going back. And the COVID, as we go back, I'm not sure what that bigger picture looks like, but it's like we're not going back to the way things were. We have an opportunity to create a whole other way of distribution. You know, there's streaming services and things like that. And so instead of standing back and saying, you know, whoa, what are we going to do here? It's like, let's do it. You know, let's create what that looks like and look at all the forms of distribution that we have access to that we didn't have access to before. You know, AKASHINGA got over 1.5 million views on YouTube. You know, that was just one channel. And yes, there's a, you know, revenue you have to think about, but it's like, you know, we have an opportunity right now to rethink that. You know, the major feature film is probably going to be a thing of the past and not it. So everything is getting reevaluated. So it's kind of a fun time. It's a difficult time, but it also has, there's a lot of opportunity here.
Definitely. Well, MISHA, we'll give the last word to you with your projects. I mean, with this project, you were working with Storyville. Perhaps you've done several co-pros or are working on in co-pros currently. What are you working on now? And how do you think your work is going to change after we've gone through this experience?
Sorry, the connection was a little bad for your last question.
Okay,
yeah. Your last question, sorry.
Yeah, just asking, I guess, what you're working on now and how you think things are going to change for you going forward as a filmmaker after this experience. Will it be more challenging, perhaps, to find funding or find partners? Or do you think now that we're in the golden age of documentary, that there's going to be a little bit more coming your way?
Sure. So I don't know if it's going to be more challenging. I don't have the feeling that it will be more challenging. I think it was already challenging, especially, I don't want to make myself the underdog, but, you know, coming from Holland, it's a tiny country. And if you want to, you know, enter the international stage, it's kind of a long route to do so. So, you know, we're super happy that we succeeded and that we ended up with Storyville. And I hope this is the first of many more to follow. And things we're working on, well, it's very, very early stages, but we're working on several projects right now. So one has to do with the family separations at the US southern border. Another one has to do with artificial intelligence, how, you know, governments are now using face readers to read people's emotions. And another one has to do with the multinational in Africa. So, but still very, very early days. So we're researching and hopefully, yeah, we'll have amazing new documentaries in a couple of years. Fingers crossed.
Great. Well, I guess that's all the time we have. And I'd like to thank everybody who has joined us from their particular corner of the world so much for joining us. Thank you out there who are watching for doing the same. I hope you all enjoy the Banff World Media Festival. We look forward to seeing you in person one of these days soon. And of course, we look forward to seeing exactly. We look forward to seeing much more from each of you filmmakers. Now be sure to catch the 2021 Rockie Awards streaming live on YouTube Tuesday, June 15th at 3 p.m. And good luck to all of you. And thanks again for your time. I'm Barry Walsh. We'll see you later.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you.